Хочу несколько слов просто про него рассказать. Sakari Tamminen из Финляндии, из компании Gemic. Мы на самом деле с Sakari знакомы давно, уже, наверное, 7 лет. И когда мы с ним в Хельсинки познакомились, они сидели на бывшем элеваторе, правда, с видом на море, но на задворках где-то на окраине Хельсинки. И вот в прошлом году я был у них в офисе рядом с центральным вокзалом. Это такой арт-нуво здание прекраснейшее бывшего казино. То есть за это время они там занимают, по-моему, 2 этажа, то есть они за это время очень большой путь проделали. Занимались они начинали с того, что занимались видеоэтнографией, а сейчас они консультируют бренды в области стратегии и глобально обслуживают несколько крупнейших брендов просто по всему миру. И поэтому Sakari будет выступать на английском языке. Мы синхронно переводить не будем, но надеюсь, что вы все поймете, потому что я его просил тоже говорить внятно, спокойно, простым языком. Вот, если у вас будут вопросы, как раз с вопросами смогу помочь перевести с русского на английский, чтобы Sakari смог ответить. Okay, Sakari, I just introduced you and told that we know each other for maybe 7 years, and you started from you started. I knew you've been doing video ethnography, and now you moved to brand consultancy for global brands. And I just told that that's a very interesting case, and I hope that people will enjoy your presentation. Thank you for coming.
Great, thank you. Can I change the slides from here?
Yeah, sure. Point to the machine there.
Okay, I'll try. Yeah, okay, great. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to speak in English. My Russian is not that good. It's a bit rusty. Mnie says Sakari, but that's about it. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the value of data in a way that I think it might be helpful for all of us to think about, especially working within the research area, research field. We generate a lot of data, of different sources of data, different ways to manipulate, process, and get data. And that's one part of what we do and what we need to do to get insights. But my talk today is a little bit more about what's the value of the data and how do you get that data to speak or tell a story that really moves or makes a difference in organizations, businesses, and helps the clients to do something with the data. And I guess this comes back to the age-old question, why don't the people who make decisions really understand or use research in a better way? And I think one of the key reasons is that we are sometimes not that good at telling stories or creating the overviews of what the data really tells us about where the culture is going and especially where the value in our lives and within particular categories is actually shifting towards to. So I'm just going to have a couple of brief slides on what we do. So our promise is not really to do research. We do reimagination or translation of insights to something that's actionable and what we and our clients see valuable in the future. So we help companies to reimagine their markets. And really, this is all about data-driven and value-driven approach. So it's not about creative work in the first place, but it contains a little bit of that. Oh, sorry. Okay. So in 4 areas we help companies to do this reimagination are listed here. So we do growth strategy based on cultural aspects or cultural value that we identify. We do brand work quite a bit, and again, it's really about data-driven or insights-driven approach, but in a different way. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, especially in the next slides. Then we do the so-called insights work, but most of that insight work only becomes valuable to clients if you translate it into the other buckets or the other areas of consulting. And finally, we do really future costing or road mapping for clients. This is just some of our public clients, but we work globally with Northern European and global clients across the world. And we've also done quite a bit of projects here in Russia. So what I'm really trying to tell you about today, or talk to you about today, is something that Alexander already mentioned. That so we started also out as an insights agency, or research agency, so to speak. But quite soon noticed that research in itself doesn't really do much. It doesn't really do the work required for the clients that we wanted it to do, which is really input into strategy, input into design, or input into really the inside competence work within the company. So we try to combine these areas. And we're growing to New York, and now also next year, hopefully in Shanghai, in China. So what does this really mean, and what am I telling you about, or what am I talking about? My own background is in research, so I'm a PhD in social anthropology and social psychology, so I have both empirical or so-called quantitative and qualitative research background, and I've actually published quite a bit on that. But I also, for my second background, I'm an engineer. So engineers do creative work in translating things and tinkering with the world and trying to see what's possible. So I think that's a very good combination to start out with this talk. And this comes to my first point. So I think all the research that we do, and you guys do also, needs to have some kind of a story behind it. So we call it the cultural strategy, or the idea around cultural strategy. And I'm just going to give you now a few brief outlines what we think is important in telling those stories. So in very simple ways, well, there are many ways to do business, but if you operate within a free market, or a market that's actually competitive, then the success is, this is kind of an old truth of the business. So business is very simple in its core. It is about figuring out what people want and giving it to them. But as we know, it is all the time getting more and more difficult. Or this is what at least we claim as researchers. Sometimes it's not even true. But anyway, we need to be unique. We need to be at the right place. We need to be at the right time. We need to figure out the right price. And this is all the things that you as professionals of research also help your clients to figure out. Anyway, all of this needs to be somehow bundled into a point of view and recommendations. So all comes down to what we call value, or the value of the data, or the value of the insight. And value, as you know also, is culturally dependent. If you look at the car industry, for example, what we work with quite a bit, one of the key insights, for example, looking into the future is that, well, people are not really switching to electric vehicles or new types of vehicles that fast, at least not in everywhere in the world, because they have different ideas about what a car is, or maybe the target groups haven't really figured out what they want yet, or something like that. And this is a typical way of looking at the market, for example, the market share or the sales figures and so on. This is one way to look at the value of the car or a car market within particular subcategories. So it seems that value is really culturally dependent. But at the same time, we know that this is not only culturally dependent, it's also time dependent. So sometimes timing is the thing, or really the key thing that needs to be correct in the product launches. If we look at how, for example, the whole idea, the business of eating has evolved and who sets the standards there, it's pretty obvious that we could go back to the authorities of the eating and look at where are the best places to eat. But these are easy ways to figure out where the value or who sets the standards in either car business or food industry or food or eating business. But it's only one part of the story. But if we dig a little bit deeper, and look at what are the real disruptors, and if we look at the value of the data that we can generate and start to try to apply that to new disruptive innovations in all fields, and I'll just talk a little bit about Tesla here, then we need to actually raise the bar also in our interpretation and in the way in which we think about what the data really tells us. So if we look at the car industry, for example, everyone here probably knows what a Tesla is. It's an electric vehicle, and it's only about 10, 15 years old company, even at the very early stages at the moment. But somehow everyone seems to talk about it. Suddenly Tesla seems to be the one that sets the standard for the industry. How is this possible? I mean, the car share is minuscule in global market. I mean, they have all sorts of problems in everything that they do, but still they seem to dominate the current discourse around what is a good car. So if we really want to understand how to interpret the data and how do you generate projections around car sales, for example, in a hybrid or electric car space, then we think we always need to contextualize stuff. So cars used to be really a signifier of a better life of modernity, of a progress, of a new lifestyle. And it has been that for the best parts of the 20th century. It's used to signify freedom of the individuality, freedom of really exploring the world, and really freedom of progress. And around 80s, this development picked up, and if we look at the global car sales, cars just proliferated, and this is what's happening to many other categories, by the way, and they became something else than a common denominator of a lifestyle, of one lifestyle. They became fragmented. So cars really were, or the car industry generated more efficient ways to do platform sharing, manufacturing technologies, and basically started to only tinker around the body of the car in a way that it could be targeted to particular sub-segments and sub-target groups. Now, this was a clever strategy at the moment when the market needed differentiation. Cars became really first-time brands. But like in every other category, this category becomes saturated. And even if you start to look at the numbers, you can't really explain what's happening in the global car sales. It's getting uneven, and even there are whole new generations that don't have a driver's license. And if you look at the US or European populations, there's a huge number of millennials under 30s or under 35s that don't even have a driver's license. The car industry needs to figure out a new, better way to position themselves to the recruiting groups that they want to recruit. And at the same time, cars and the underlying reasons why cars are becoming so problematic for the whole car industry is not only that the sales are dropping, but at the same time, we can see that it's becoming culturally a category of things not to own. Cars have become not only a source of individual discontent, but also a social problem. They have become a source of an urban planning problem. And if you're a car company, how do you then tell what are the indicators or what are the metrics that you should be using to measure and predict what's going to happen in the car industry? This is a good question. And I think it's a similar case to many other modern categories that we have and you guys are also working with. So how do you differentiate, or how do you create meaningful difference or some kind of a competitive edge in this kind of a situation when the marketplace actually seems to be almost like a disastrously framed category? then I think we need to step out from the normal ways of doing research and start to look at how are things framed in the future, or how are the things that we really talk about desirable future or as desirable futures, how are they framed and under which terms are they described, even visually. This is a typical way of looking. If you look at the megacities from Beijing to Silicon Valley, to Central Europe, to even Middle East, and you look at how the urban planning is rethinking what cities in the future should look like, they are something like this. They are green, but they're modern, but they don't have any cars. So what do you do? Or what should you start to measure as a car company then, to really think, to find a niche or to find an opportunity in this space? I mean, it's an epistemological research question. Where do you find out data? Where does the car fit in here? In this imaginary. And this is, by the way, these things do matter, because these will drive the urban planning, which means that there's no car space here. We think you need to start looking or using and start looking new ways to generate and analyze and interpret the data. So you need to start to look into the imaginaries of the future and look at the place of, for example, cars and other things in that future. And if we start to do that, we start to see that there are places for all kinds of things in those futures that I just showed to you as an example, but they have a very particular articulation or particular meaning or particular shape. And for some reason, Tesla seems to fit in here. Not only because the cars look nice, and they are actually on par or even better than the normal cars, but they have much more important things here. I mean, they have a meaning that derives from a meaningful future space, which is actually getting rid of all the problems that I showed you in the pollution picture. Cars are becoming self-driving, and not only self-driving, they're also becoming clean. They are deriving from a clean digital future. And none of the big car companies before Tesla did this. So they culturally framed and purposefully built the cars to actually respond to this future. So it's not really a car in a way that we know it. It's actually a mobility or piece of technology that's coming from the future and a digital one too. So this really taps into the imaginaries of progress. And it's not only about progress, it also gives a meaning, especially in the US, to a narrative of rebuilding the nation. But this evolution really poses existential challenges to the whole old car industry, and you can't work with the old data if you want to really start to tackle this problem that's evident for the whole car industry. So what you need to do is start to map two things or data that comes from two metrics or two spaces. You need to start looking into things and ideals of the people, ideas of the industry around the functional value of things, objects, cars, new technologies. But at the same time, you need to map it with the idea of the cultural value. There's a space that I showed you that seems to be like ethereal or something like imaginary. But it's not. It's actually mapping new meanings. And those meanings can be mapped with social science or cultural research methods quite specifically. And when you map these two, cultural value and functional value, you'll really hit the innovation sweet spot and actually can start to generate data and meaning behind that data that tells the clients, the industry, something meaningful about where the whole world is heading towards to, and what's the meaning and what the positioning in that space should be. And I picked up Tesla as one of the examples, but it's not only about these new technology objects that we work with. We work with really banal objects such as coffee, for example. And if you look at what Nespresso was able to do, was to generate the success that they did with the convenient, self-serving, high-end coffee pod. And it's actually tapping or using the same kind of a method to reframe what coffee is all about. They took the normal functional value, a space where it's really hard to do innovative stuff, because you probably all have worked with coffee category, you know that the need states of the people don't vary that much. It's almost stuck as a space, very hard to differentiate there. So you need to go in the cultural value space, but really innovate there and say, well, what is the space that people dream about in coffee, and how can we stretch it a little bit? And what they were capable of doing was really fetishizing the idea of coffee as a scarce resource through product origins and so on. It really looks like a gemstone, a kind of almost like a jewelry shop now, the Nespresso shop. So this is how the innovations within the space of forward-looking companies is happening, and this poses challenges all the time for research agencies. And I think this is where you guys need to be aware of where the game is heading towards to, but also how the data should be made to speak a language that really top management responds to. So how does this come about, and how, I mean, this is a very simple way to present how the mindset in this kind of a research or consulting needs to change from the traditional methods. I mean, most of the times research is done through product-driven or category-driven approach. We would take healthy foods, for example, and look at how the healthy foods are as a category evolving, and what's driving that as a kind of a leader brand and so on. But the problem is, you don't really, it's really hard to say outside of that category then what really drives it, and one are the other categories, adjacent category, for example, that are implied here, that drive the healthy foods, are bought with it or something like that. And what's the real meaning behind healthy foods? The other way to approach this question is really to look at the target group and say, well, we'll take the health conscious people and we cross-reference that with the healthy foods category, and then we'll generate a nice cross-tab or any kind of a regressions or any kind of a progressions from there, and see, who is actually buying this. All of this is needed, and this is where we are getting better and better I think as a community, and researchers tools are getting better and more accurate. But what really drives the whole category, for example, of healthy foods and the healthy consciousness in societies is the real question of value. And if you can tap into that, then you can actually say something meaningful where the whole idea of healthiness is moving to, and how should companies respond to it. So what we are trying to do, and what we advise you also to look at, is really to reframe the questions around the phenomenon, such as the evolving cultural relationship to female or male body would be the real question to tackle behind healthy foods or health-conscious people, to really get meaningful insights out of that, and really to give a space to operationalize really the meaningful questions around what should a company do, or how to advise best a company to advance or reposition their offering. I'm not going to go into this guy, but I'm going to go into the methods that we use. And that kind of links back to the question that I was asking earlier, or saying that category or target group led research methods are good. Even if we get behavioral data or self-reported data, it doesn't really matter. People are good at telling, but we know it is usually wrong in terms of the behavior. But when they are able to also tell about their ideas or behaviors, they also do articulate all of their desires and needs within the existing category paradigms and knowledge and experiences around that category. But we are really bad as human beings to anticipate or desire something that's not there yet. So how do you do that? Or how do you get there? Or how should you start to operationalize the emerging space of the futures or possible futures, so that would actually drive meaningful recommendations also to the clients? We think this is difficult, but I mean, the meaningful and the most accurate way to do this is through cultural analytics and semiotics works around the emergent spaces of meaning that drive the whole categories beyond the category rules. So the new phenomena that actually are emerging that are affecting the car industry, the coffee industry, or the health and beauty industry. So you need to really start to map the emergent spaces, emerging meanings, for example, of the body. This is an example for a diet food category that we mapped. If you look at what's happening for the health during the last few decades, it's pretty obvious that it's not really only the category that's changed, but fundamentally the relationship to our bodies has changed. We started out from 80s or somewhere there with the idea of diets, really. I mean, the whole idea of the diets and control of the diet emerged then. It was all about functional control over the body. Then we are moving into, or have moved into, the space where the so-called natural eating or healthy eating has become the norm, and this is where we are now. And the whole idea is that people should eat and feel intuitively in tune with their holistic body. And now, the last space that we're moving into and what we see signs of, and CrossFit, for example, is a good example of that, is really the preparation of the body to something that's super, or is able to do anything, not only enjoyment, but also function. So the whole idea, for example, behind CrossFit is that be prepared for anything and have fun while doing it. But if you map this trajectory of ideals around the body and generate data around different discourses, people discourses, and all sorts of data, and put it together and map it, you start to see that the old category leaders and old ideas around diets are actually becoming residual, and they are fading away, and they are not interesting anymore. So it doesn't really matter if you start to track the diet category in terms of market share and so on, because you will never know what actually drives the evolution of the category and actually results in the rejection of old diet enhancing products. So you need to start mapping the future and the new spaces and give them meaning. Where do we play next? So do we play in the weight control area, or do we actually play in the unrestrained enjoyment and re-articulate the whole idea around body and healthy eating around that? And we have our own methods to do that, but I think this is just a idea around the way, well, just a kind of a quick representation of what we think should be done, and you guys should be also thinking about in producing the data. So how do we get to the forward-looking spaces of the future? So the main message to me is that we need to get more culturally relevant, and the insights need to be more culturally relevant and value relevant. And we can do it through all kinds of means: anthropology, social research, semiotics, and all technologies that are actually supporting these different points of view on what's happening in category and what's happening in the world that's driving those categories. But the tools themselves will not help if we don't have a right, interesting interpretation of what's driving the category change. Because that's actually the most abstract and the emotional appeal up here in the very top head here. So we should be mapping about the collective ideals and expectations and aspirations about the world to really see how do we then give it to people. The narrow, the concrete, the functional, interaction with products and services, or the benefit spaces, or the functional needs that people have within those new futures that are super aspirational and will drive forward to new or the companies that are actually tapping into these new aspirations. So it's really about getting back to the first slide that I was showing to you. So business is really simple. It should be really simple. I mean, we can make it complicated if we want, but it's really about serving people the things that they want. But if we don't really know what they want, we can't really optimize the ways in which we give it to them or serve it to them. And most research still today operates within here in the kind of a lower optimization or executional space. And the whole community, I think, should be aiming towards much more bigger goals to tell those cultural narratives and identify those so we can consult the companies better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sakari. Коллеги, есть ли у вас вопросы?
Hello, and thank you for everything you said. And I'm really interested in the category of cultural value. Could you please give a bit more detail about that? Because now it seems quite vague, since you fit into it both the new values emphasized by emerging problems such as pollution and emerging customer expectations such as affordable luxury and personalized products, etc. And new sets of ideas and new cultural norms, and so on and so forth. Or probably the category actually includes all of those. Thank you.
So, could you give the mic back to her because I have a question? So, I do understand that everyone tries to do and foresee this, but what is the, I mean, could you repeat the question because I didn't really catch what the main point of the question was?
Чуть погромче просто говорите.
I don't think it's about the volume, but about how I word it. So my question is, what is the content of the category cultural value? What does it mean? What does it include? What is cultural value?
Yes.
In terms of indicators, probably.
Okay, so this is why I didn't pose any methods, because this is not a methodological question. This is about theoretical question and framing of what we see in the world and really trying to fit the pieces together. So this is a mix and match of existing theoretical knowledge and also building theories and testing them. But there needs to be a theory about the world, not only data. That's how you get there. And I mean, that theory will need to be much more abstract than the current data or the categories even that we see there. Is that explaining it? I mean, there you can see what is the value, because the value is that meaning of that space. In semiotics, you would say value is actually meaning.
Коллеги, вот еще вопрос. А еще потом, сейчас сначала.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about cultural insights, but not in FMCG products or some consumer-oriented, but for example, pharmaceutical industry. Is there the same trend? So for example, if we take some medicines, like, I don't know, painkillers, so is it the same stuff, or just there are some kind of traditional industries that won't change with some cultural insights? Thank you.
It's a good question. Funnily enough, I've actually worked on the question that you asked, and 1.5 years ago. And I mean, the methods in themselves are not any different. And the question is, for example, if you look at whatever medical category, the challenge in medical space is that you would have a lot of things. I mean, you have a lot of different audiences. A medical community, for example, looks at chemical, kind of molecular properties, for example. and then the consumers would look at very different things. So it's really about trying to find what really drives and what is the really real value of that, for example, of painkiller for consumers versus the medical or the R&D that actually tries to figure it out. And usually, I mean, as we know, for consumers, it's all about creating meaning rather than explaining the scientific logic, because that will be universal. So you need to be aware of those. So I don't think that, I mean, in medical space, it applies totally in the same way. Yeah.
Коллеги, вот последний вопрос еще. Там у нас есть время, да, вот, пожалуйста. А передайте вот, девушка, поднимите еще раз руку. Ага, вот все. Last question.
Thank you for the presentation. Could you please clarify, if possible, of course, which methods do you use to spot out the cultural insights? Thank you.
Sakari, speak up a little bit.
Yes. So there are a variety of methods, and what we call the cultural analysis will encompass those different spheres of or kind of disciplines. We have a semiotic grounding. So semiotics is one of the key methods that we use to map out emergent spaces, but not only semiotics, but also analysis of the institutions that lead social change, and we try to map the semiotics to those change agents, so to speak. And I guess, I mean, for social scientists, these methods are nothing new, but the mixture of the way in which we use them, things like semiotics or discourse analysis, plus looking at sources of data, that's the biggest insight, at least for me in the work, comes from using the old methods that we all know in a very creative way, if it answers your question.
Thank you very much, Sakari.
Thank you.
Perfect, interesting presentation.